like basic. Not really. That was a carryover from COVID because people.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, you should see I was missing. Really forward at the time. She did.
Chair of subcommittee.
She attached it to the last email she
Okay,
sent.
So.
all right.
Up to you, but I think it's easiest to drop it. End the meeting and then send out.
Yeah, I wish.
I've had folders, no, like I've created folders
Yeah.
and then I can't do anything and it's
Right.
James Connick.
Yeah, yeah.
Are
Yeah,
not
okay.
on our personal accounts. Every time we try to solve a problem, we create a new one.
It's just through the.
The BOE. Let me check. We're good.
You're gonna sit there, you're gonna.
I sat down here today. Somebody did for the work tonight.
All right, so we'll start with our usual approval of last week's minutes. Any comments or concerns with last week's minutes? Motion to approve.
So moved?
Second,
Second.
seconded Jim. All in favor? Opposed? Unanimous passes. Thank you. All right, Lisa, where we are in the process.
My computer is deciding to do something not related to.
Password reset day, right?
Yeah, that's what I brought my day, yeah.
We have a wonderful update that's forthcoming. And then I just switch computers.
Are you, I'm doing that on that page. Excellent.
So.
We're doing it differently.
Yes. We're trying to do it without the owls so that the people can hear. If here, the sound will be much better and the video will be improved. Perfect. So first on the agenda. Getting into the,
But now I gotta get.
yeah. So I can,
Yeah, so while they're doing that, but thank you, Diane.
Yeah.
You'll notice we're set up differently, as Diane's mentioned, so there's mics on the table. Just realize those mics, all the mics are hot. So if you're having side chatter, you're broadcasting over the Zoom, so please be aware of that as we go forward.
Here, we're gonna pull up where we're at in the process, but I'm gonna just kind of talk about it until we have the visual. Somehow we found ourselves at February 10th. And we are working, one of the big things, this month is the survey. And making sure that survey gets out to the public. I know the subcommittee has an update on that later tonight. And then some of the other upcoming events are then getting the feedback back from the survey so that you guys have data to take your next steps. In the meantime, while we are waiting for the survey responses to come back, we'll continue to work with the committee to make refinements to the options. I think we're almost connected here, right?
She's
Amy?
promoting herself. Thank you.
Well deserved. Coming up right now, perfect. Yep, we can see it up there. And you get to, there you go, you're good. Okay, so, let's move to the. Let's advance the slide to the next.
Yeah.
And the next. And switch with you, all right, perfect. All right, so we're all familiar with this chart. Anybody chiming in for the first time? Where we're at is in the February, we can't see it. Is there any way to get rid of that bar at the bottom of the Zoom? I'm sorry, Emily. At the bottom of the Zoom, essentially February is right in between initial options and preferred options. We're collecting that data. And we are at the February 10th meeting. We will meet again on the 24th. Next week is the school vacation week. So wrapping up this month, the survey goes live on 2/14. So on Valentine's Day, it goes live. And we will meet again on the 24th. At the 24th, we will not have the feedback from that survey yet. We'll be doing review of progress on options. Rolling into March, that March 3rd meeting is where we expect to review progress on options, and survey results are expected March 7th, so that we have them for the 10th. So we'll have 2 meetings to talk about options before we have survey results. And then we will have survey results on the 10th. If everything goes according to plan. And then at the 17th is where we'll start talking about making reductions based on that data that you've received. Following that, shortly thereafter, we'll have a joint town council school board meeting on the 19th. And then we will meet again on March 24th. And at that time, we'll start to get these surveys out, comparing any of the reduced options. All right.
Did you mention the forum dates?
Oh, I did not. Oh, sorry. At the bottom there in red, community forum to solicit feedback. So we're proposing March 25th or the 26th. So we would like feedback from the building committee and all those that have access to the multiple schedules in town as to which of those dates would be best for the next community forum. Any thoughts on that forum date?
I'm sorry, Lisa, I was.
March 25th or 26th. We're proposing is the date for the next forum, just trying to get that nailed down because we're gonna have to start advertising and getting communications out on that. The 25th is a Tuesday and the 26th is a Wednesday.
25th is, there is an all district choral concert. Again, I understand that we can't possibly make modifications for every school event. I also am noticing that on the 26th, and I'm looking to Tom, there is a town council meeting, which I believe is related to the FY 26 budget, which I believe we would both need to be present at.
Fortunately, we would, yeah.
So.
So the 25th?
25th. Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. So as of right now, March 25th, Tuesday, March 25th will be the next community forum. And at that, we'll continue to talk about what is reviewed at that meeting, as we get closer. The intent being that all of this goes according to plan. We will be talking with the community about the reduction of options or the options and the reductions of options from there. That's also the information that will go out in the survey. So similar to how we did this, we have this round, there's a communication outreach in person and then a follow-up with the survey. So you're getting multiple data points. All right, I will turn it back over to you, Charlie.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick update from the leadership team. Start with just a reminder as we move towards elimination of options. The goal is to find the best option that meets the most of our criteria and we think we'll vote. We all have our personal biases. We all want, have certain things that we want in this. Just a reminder that you've got to balance that against trying to find the best solution that will pass. Don't get so dug into your option or the option you think is the right one that you're not open to considering others. Just a reminder as we move forward. Secondly, I intend to request guidance from the Board of Education on some of the project imperatives. As of today, it's been very broad as to what this project must do or must not do. We don't have any of those. And so I had a conversation with Shannon about this as we have tried to prioritize the priorities over and over again, right? We keep running into different priorities for different people. And so I'd like to hear from the governing body what their priorities are to help us sort of finalize that matrix and how we're going to somewhat objectively narrow this down to two options by March. I want to make it really clear, this is us requesting to the board, not the board, telling us what to do. I'm requesting that they give us some guidance on this. Any feedback on that? Any comments? Okay. I'm going to start with the matrix and sort of pull out some of the bigger items that are on the matrix that we all know and just ask them to kind of prioritize what's on the matrix as it is today. Next is some feedback from our legal team. I'll turn it over to Diane and Lisa, who I think have kind of the best articulation of what council came back.
Sure. I can go ahead and get started, Lisa, and you can jump in certainly. So, one of the questions that we know that we've been talking about over the last several meetings is related to prefab options and getting information about that and how that might work into this project or not. And so I believe at last week's meeting, we informed folks that we were seeking legal guidance. And so we did have, we did reach out to our attorney in regards to this. And then we actually had a meeting in person to follow up. And Tom was present at that meeting, and Lisa and Charlie and Ray and I to just kind of have more conversation about that to make sure that we were understanding things as they are. And so basically, we went through the applicable statutes. And so, the statute that we've been looking at is, again, that design bid build and, how does prefab work into that? Or because obviously what we've been talking about is it seemingly seems like unless there were several different prefab builders, that we might be having that conversation with a specific builder before the process. And so that would go against the design bid build process. And so what we talked about with our attorney, Greg M. from Drummond Woodsum, what he explained to us is, in the competitive bidding process, contractors submit their bids to us, right? And then the lowest bid wins the project. And so, and that is based on the project specifications that our architect will build. And then that fulfills design bid build. And so as we were explaining to him what we were considering about this prefabricated building units, basically what he said was there are two different ways where we can procure these. One would be directly from the manufacturer, as I just discussed, right? And that seems to be problematic with the statute as it applies to schools. And then the second way would be through a general contractor, right? So when a general contractor bids out a project, they're bidding out the project, and then they're going to go ahead and move forward with whomever they choose for subcontractors. And so for the sake of conversation, if Charlie was a general contractor and he bid on the project and then he decided, to subcontract with a prefab designer, he would get to do that because he was the bidder, he was the general contractor, and it is, within the realm of decision-making for a general contractor to decide how to erect what they've bid on, right? And so what our attorney explained to us is that that scenario would work. What wouldn't work would be if we contracted directly with a prefab company, because that would be considered what they call off-site construction. And there is specific language in the statute that says for school construction projects, if off-site construction exceeds $250,000, then you must do that by competitive bid. So, so that was really his guidance to us, that, that the competitive bid requirement applies to certain contracts for school construction and renovation. But it doesn't apply if we're not the contracting party. So if someone else, if the general contractor who's overseeing the project, and as we talked about it from a practical standpoint, we need to have a general contractor anyway, right? Like we could never talk about a project of the scope that we're discussing by just, entering into an agreement, even if it was legal, with a prefab company and say, just come on down and bring everything over and I'll look to Todd Jepson and he'll make sure that it all gets pieced together correctly, right? Like, that's not practical. And so that really was, the crux of his conversation. The other pieces of the conversation as they relate to our work here are really around looking at the project in its entirety and figuring out what are the parts of the project that seem like would be a fit for prefabrication, right? And this is where I think Lisa can add to the conversation, because Lisa and her team have been in a lot of discussion with at least one specific vendor, and they haven't seemingly been able to provide you with projects of a large scope.
Correct. No, you did, thank you, Diane, you did a good job summarizing that. Just to kind of build on, before I go to that, build on what Diane said, what we can do is write the specification, and to Diane's point, leave it up to the GC as to if we specify, hey, these portions could be done off-site, then they can make that call and they'll figure out which one's more cost effective, because ultimately they're trying to get a little bit. I'm gonna jump ahead to a slide because I have a summary on this, just to, sorry to make everyone ill here. Did I pass it? Oh my goodness. Oh, there it is. Thank you. To kind of, first three bullets speak exactly to what Diane just talked about, competitive bidding, GC. And if what I just said, if we specify design, so it's left to the contractor, how that would work. Something to keep in mind is prefab offsite, it's gonna be built on a modular. And so what that means is what they do is they build it in a warehouse, and essentially it needs to find its way onto a tractor trailer bed. So there's certain sizes we have to work within. A classroom, that works great. We can, be able to take that modular and work it to a classroom. What we have to dig into a little bit further is, as we start to lay some of these out, does that modular help us or hinder us in any way? And we don't know that answer yet, but we can look at, are there actually more efficiencies to laying out the school off of that modular, because we can reduce the square footage because we don't have to hit within that, or not. And that's one thing we need to look at. So not a pro or con, just some other data point we have to identify. And this could be a hybrid approach. What we're finding in our conversations with Triumph is we asked for what is their largest school example they could provide us. And the largest one they provided us was about 7,950 square feet, or 995 square feet. And they couldn't provide us the number of K-12 projects they've done. They couldn't give us an example in Maine. So what we kind of put together is this would work for a smaller scale addition, some of the smaller additions on some of these options. And so let's say that is the case, and let's just use, we're adding an addition to one of the primary schools, and we say this is the way to which makes the most sense to look at modular prefab, offsite construction for this. We then started talking about, well, what is the savings? Because we keep hearing that there's a savings to do this. And the way they explained it to us was, it's not necessarily a significant cost savings, it is a time savings. And one might say, well, if it's a time savings, how come it doesn't equate to cost? You have to think about, in the traditional on-site, we have, we're site prep, then we're doing the labor to build the building up. Think about, that's this amount of labor. Well, that same amount of labor now is just happening over a shorter period of time. So what we're saving is really the general conditions. And that's the part to where the general contractor is on site accruing costs for heating of the building or setting up the construction site and things like that. So that's the savings and cost. And so it's really figuring out what is that percentage. And so the last bullet on here, this is a hypothetical. Let's say that we saved, right now general conditions are 10% of the construction costs. And let's say that we save 30% in the schedule, and that's not based on anything. So this is just a hypothetical. Let's say we save 30% in the schedule. on a 20 million construction project, that's not including soft costs, you would see about a $600,000 potential savings if that were the case. So that's what we need to dig into, is where does this make sense? And then what could that, general condition savings be? One of the benefits to saving time is you're on that site less time, which is, as we just talked about, you do see the cost savings for that general conditions, but it also has a less time impact on the site, less time impact on the students and teachers. We just have to look at, well, if that's 3 months, does that really fall over the summer and there really isn't a significant savings in regards to learning time? Or is it a greater savings and therefore we're actually realizing a savings in regards to the impact to learning? So I think we figured out how we can do this procurement wise, and now we're gonna lay on top of that all these other pieces to say, okay, what are the scenarios for these different options and what is the cost savings and what is the time savings? But I think what we walked away is it's not like we're reducing a number by 50%, but there is a savings that we can on some of these find by doing this offsite prefab
then-
construction.
And then the other piece that I took away from the conversation, and certainly like Charlie, I'd love to get and Tom, your input from the conversation as well, is that, if we put this out to bid to a general contractor, and for the sake of this conversation, a GC did decide to use this company, right? Like, again, when we put something out to bid, we couldn't say to a general contractor, you must use a prefabricator, right? Like that would be a decision by the general contractor. What it would require for us to do if we wanted to keep that option open though, is that we would be asking Harriman to build their specs such that components of the project could be used with this model if a GC wanted to. And I just, think that it is worthy of this committee's conversation. If the monetary cost is not as great as people might have thought previously, are we limiting our potential design by building it on paper to spec that way? And then we hire a GC who's like, I know exactly how I do this. I build schools all the time and I'm going with what I know. I've never worked with a prefab company, and so I'm not going to use them. And now we may have inadvertently handcuffed ourselves with our design because we were trying to incorporate that. So I just put that out there for the group's consideration.
Do the legal team have, say we are not able to or allowed to instruct them that it was designed in a way that prefab was in mind? Or they may not get there on their own. Are we allowed to say that, or is it, is that then?
Double check that, but I think we're allowed to indicate that, they could go either way and say that it is design, we can say it's designed to a modular of X, Y, and Z, and leave that up to them, but we'll clarify that.
Yeah, that's kind of how I heard it.
Yeah.
And then just to reiterate what Diane said, right, the risk in that, as I understand it, is that they have to design within the bounds of what can be modular. And so that limits the design. And then if the GC decides to stick build it, you potentially have to do new details and everything else. So the drafting time and everything else gets compounded, right?
It's more the layout of the modular itself.
Okay,
As in like the size to which we lay out the building.
okay,
Think of offsite at just like stick built, in many ways, except for we will essentially give different directions in the flashing and all of that more than likely, or ask that they reach out to architect to clarify and verify. And then we would have to do that in CA, so that would be an added cost.
And to clarify the timing of this, would we hit referendum before going to a GC? Like, are we potentially gonna ask the town?
That's
for
how it
the
works.
So we could potentially ask the town for the wrong amount of money. If they decide to not go with a prefab, we'd have to go back to the, no.
So I think what you would do in this case is you would ask the town for the amount of money that it would end up costing if it wasn't stick built, and then reduce the bond by any savings that is realized when they switch, if they were to switch back to offsite. That makes sense.
You mean ask the town for stick build costs, then reduce
On,
it?
let's call it onsite and offsite, because they're both
Okay.
technically stick built, but onsite and offsite. So onsite, you would use that number for the
Okay.
referendum. Because we can't guarantee that they would go to an offsite construction process. And therefore you wouldn't have enough money to do the project.
Yeah, it seems to me that the cost savings here will be not demonstrable and probably lost in the scope of the magnitude of this project. It's gonna be very hard to isolate. I guess I'm probably reiterating, but my big takeaway is, through the bidding process, I'd like to find a way to, in very limited circumstances directed by Harriman, to allow this method if the GC chooses. And I appreciate Diane's point of saying maybe we should just move on from this altogether. But I think there's been a lot of interest and energy around this table and in the last committee around this, such that we ought to keep it alive in some fashion. The other thing, just for me, is just having the continuity of a general contractor, having multiple entities with different responsibilities and where those points connect. That's just headaches and lawsuits potentially. So having the accountability of a single point of contact that's responsible for delivering a product at the end of the day is super, super important.
Yeah, I was just curious, Lisa, how would, I guess to me, is it worth offering up prefab as like an alternate in your documents and then just do base bid, stick built? And then how, I mean, given that we're kind of tied to design bid build, how would you specify like who owns what? Like, would you have to issue a scope matrix as like, who owns what? Like the prefab guy, does he just have framing? Does he have any sheetrock? Like, how would you show that within your documents as to not confuse subcontractors?
I think essentially we would
GCs.
indicate, I think we would, it's gonna be up to the GC ultimately. Because they're gonna be required to figure out who owns which scope when they bid the project. We would indicate the modular to which it's designed on, because one modular company may provide X, Y, and Z in their offsite, and this one may only provide, X and Y. And so we want to make sure that we don't lock ourselves into one of those, and really the GC has the flexibility. So if we design it to a modular that will fit on a tractor trailer and works with any, we would want multiple modular companies that would work with. That would allow them to kind of go that route and do their homework, and it'll be up to them as to how they do that. And that's the benefit that Tom's saying to having that, is that one GC, because they're gonna be the one that oversees all that and responsible for that coordination.
Do you, in your expertise, and experience, have you seen, like, to me, I haven't really worked with this like in my past, but to me, this just seems like there's a ton of coordination that has to happen. And given the hard bid scenario we're tied to, I think that opens us and the city up to a ton of risk that might not be there if we were to go with, CM on it. What's your thought on that?
We don't have the ability to go CM.
Right.
I mean, the advantage of CM is, and for anyone that doesn't know, CM is construction manager. It was, that exception has sunsetted. The advantage to that is we essentially go out for CMs. They come on early in the process and they work alongside us to look at the details and stuff as it's being constructed. They can make recommendations for more efficiency. They're more familiar with the plan. So the best way to describe it is the GC has become familiar with the plans over many months. A hard bid, the documents have been created, and then a general contractor on bid day gets the plans, and they have a finite amount of time, and it's usually going to be about 4 to 6 weeks to figure out everything that is included in that document and put together a number. So the risk is just the lack of familiarity and the ability to maybe miss things or misinterpret information. And you don't have a contractor working right there to say, this is how I would build it. Because every builder builds it differently. So I mean, that is the risk, but we don't have, unfortunately, we don't have that luxury of going that route. So we have to go forward with putting together a really good set of hard bid documents, and that's what we have to do all the time.
So just to clarify, in the SBAC one, we didn't see any cost benefit either. It was only time benefit.
Mhm.
We assumed the same costs. And one of the other things that we really prioritized is minimal disruption on site.
Mhm.
So I think Jim was really focused on, you know, during the summer, if you already have prefab, it'd be a lot faster to get that set up and minimize disruption. So I think if those are in the RFP or whatever, they say it has to be within 3 years that it's built and you get this much time on campus, then they might really consider prefab as an option.
So
I think we would, yeah, we would have to, we try to put even less time, as minimal time as we think it can get done. Then. And then, yes, they would potentially, if you go this way, have that option.
So this is a good topic and I hate to stop discussion, but we've got to move on. We have a discussion block. If there's other questions specific to this, we can come back to it during that session, but I got to move on to public comment. So with that, we'll open the floor to public comment. If there's any? Nope, not today.
Hey, I didn't answer my question, we couldn't specify modulars in your RFP. All right. Because they're a modular company all over the country. You know, so just do the cost of shipping from Oklahoma or Maryland or Massachusetts or whatever.
Subcommittee report out.
Yep, so we're gonna do site selection at the end, obviously, as we move into executive session, so turn it over to
We
the
actually, we
communication.
do have information in here for site selection that is for public consumption too. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we'll do that right at the end and then we'll go into executive
Gotcha.
session, that way it kind of flows.
Okay, you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, so everybody received, are we going to talk survey right now for a minute? Everybody received the paper copy of the survey, and this is in pretty much final form. There'll be, maybe a couple of formatting changes made. If you have any questions or comments, I would just ask you can email them or share them in the note catcher doc that we shared with you. Or anything super quick you can ask right now.
The new one, I mean, I haven't seen it.
It was sent out this morning. So, this morning. But if you'd like to take a chance to look at it and, you can get back to me
Okay.
tomorrow if you
That'd
want.
be great.
Send me an email. Okay. Okay, so people have received the paper copy of the survey. Let's see, took with 2 fewer concepts in the matrix, we went back to the original setup. We have 5 options now that I think people are pretty happy with the way that lays out. We did take in as many comments from the group as we could last time, and ultimately we're depending on our consultants at Market Decisions Research for some best practices in terms of language we use, length of the document, and sequencing and things like that. But if you have a question or comment, please share it. You can send it by email or you can put it in the note catcher document. I'd ask for those by say 10 tomorrow morning, because we'll be meeting with Harriman and finalizing. And then the only other thing I had to touch base on was talking about, from a communications perspective, how we communicate out to the public as a committee. Because we are all engaged in this project because we care about Scarborough, we care about the schools, and we have an understanding of the deep need for a new school or a new school solution in Scarborough. The last attempt was voted down by a wide margin and people were mad about it. And so we're moving forward, and a key focus in this phase is bringing the public in, building public trust, rebuilding public trust in the process. And as a committee, we're doing our utmost to listen and learn from the community. And ultimately, we want to bring them into this decision-making process, right? And help them understand what the trade-offs are, because we cannot have everything that we want, right? And so we are a team with a shared goal. We're trying to bring the public into it. And these questions are super complicated. And I would simply ask the members of the committee, work through your wish list and your desires for this project in the committee so that we can speak with a voice. rather than going outside the committee and kind of airing your grievances in the public square. Because these are complicated questions and we're working through them, but if we can work through them here, we will keep the public engaged and they will see that we're working together in the committee. That's it.
Thanks. I just had one question on the survey and I can do it
Yeah.
in the note catcher. By the way, I think the final draft is great. You guys did a wonderful job of capturing everybody's feedback last week. I think it looks good. I noticed the change though to free text boxes on each option, and I'm just curious. I think that's great because you don't limit the feedback that we get from the community, but as we try to aggregate those and kind of categorize everybody's feedback, how do you see, or how did the consultant think that might go and the challenges
So
we might
that was
have?
always his intent, and we were
Yes.
shocked that he
Okay.
said he was able to kind of cull through all that data, but they are confident that they're able to do it. They have a way of tabulating that information, and
Okay, good.
he said that's the best way to get the feedback you want to get without restricting people, and
Okay,
Best way to listen.
all right, good. All right, we'll trust him.
yeah. And I will, Lisa kind of mentioned this in the schedule, but just to reiterate, so I think
Just want one of
we
these?
will be getting the survey results on Friday, the 7th. I confirmed with them that they're able to target that in order to send it out to you guys to be able to review before Monday.
And we also just added on here, because I know there was some, but I know if you're not in the committee, you don't realize all the things the committee is doing or has done or what's coming up. So we just did kind of a, what is the focus, which obviously is the survey. And then the upcoming focus is communicating the survey. So there's plan leader ads, town newsletter, district newsletter, social media. We put out their sandwich boards. I don't know if there's been some conversation about getting that out there too. Forum planning, and then working on other educational pieces and kind of figuring out what the priority is around communication. And that's going to be the next focus as we come off this survey. What are those items before we focus on the next? So just wanted folks to see that so that you knew what was upcoming. And there was a great article in the Leader, this past week.
Comment on that article. I thought did a fantastic job of organizing and explaining what had happened with the options dropping and clarified. I just thought it was relatively concise and really went well, read well.
All
Is
right.
this the last we're gonna talk about the survey?
Yeah, I mean, unless it comes up in discussion, but yeah.
I still don't see how it's gonna be useful. Because how are we gonna be able to compare across options? Like, they're gonna have pros and cons of what some people like and don't like, but we already could come up with our pros and cons. Like, we kind of need to know what their preference is. So like a more of a forced rank or a voting of what they want, like, it's gonna be good information, but it's not gonna be information that's gonna help us prioritize like what the community wants.
Yeah, we talked to Brian about that. I think he felt like a forced rank would actually deter people from finishing. You know, because it's just so many, and then if they're actually forced to rank, it just becomes overly complicated and cumbersome. I think we just want to we partly just want to give people a feel for what the decisions are that we're having to make and what those trade-offs are. And also, just get as much information we can from them about what what's important and what's not.
And the
No
flip side-
tool is perfect.
Yeah, the flip side too is there's gonna be modifications made to all of these options. So you're trying to understand what it is about those different options people are connected to. So you guys have that data because ultimately you're tasked with reducing that information or those options based on the feedback given.
And don't underestimate just the power of the engagement alone
And
and
education.
the education that I think a lot of survey takers are going to be seeing a lot of detail they didn't know. So I think there's value just in that alone.
Yeah, that was basically my takeaway when I sat and did the online version. And I mean, I thought it was just so long because it's page after page of, you don't have that grid. And I thought about, it's going to be hard to draw any conclusions. But the value, I think the value is just the fact that we are reaching out, we're, we are trying to get people engaged. And
The thing is, people are gonna look at these results in this committee in a month, they're gonna say, well, this says this, so we should prioritize option X, because we've got to get down to options. How are you gonna?
I think that was kind of why I asked the question about how we categorize and what take away, based on free inputs and. I mean, we have a professional consultant that does this for a living. I think. Like I said, I think we gotta trust that he'll be able to distill those down into some actionable data points that we can evaluate. And if that doesn't happen, right, then at least we have, to Tom's point, right, that we've engaged, we've educated the community and then we'll take some lessons learned in survey 2.
James, I would just say, you really can't have it both ways. At first, I heard you say that it's not gonna produce actionable results. And then you're concerned that the results are gonna come back to haunt us, that if we don't follow them, so.
No. People are gonna try and make actionable out of this, but it's not the right information to be able to do that. So they're gonna look at like, how much do you want to have like a building that's up to code, and they're gonna say, well, this means that they don't like option B, but it's not really gonna tell you that.
I think what it's gonna tell us is what kind of scope reductions we ought to prioritize or not prioritize, right? I think it's gonna help inform those decisions that we're gonna make.
Because we may find that it doesn't look anything like any of these options.
So
may
we don't
find
wanna find out at referendum that we never asked and we cut something that was, at least 51% of people's requirements to pass a referendum. We don't have time to keep doing this. So I think if we engage the public, November 2025 is the worst timing you can find.
I mean, we need a survey for sure. Okay.
I suspect the second one will be far more granular and hopefully instructive, that you'll have a couple officers at best, ideally a site, so we can really drill down on some very specific questions and feedback.
And cost options too. I think we don't have that in there right now, so for a comparative point, it would be difficult for somebody to say, I like this better than this without seeing cost. I think this one is higher level and we're just trying to get an idea of what people are thinking, what's important to them.
Help you guys prioritize the priorities.
And I do think we tried to hit that, like, I think, there was some language added into the introduction that tried to clarify the purpose of the survey, right? So I feel like, this is a key sentence. The survey aims to gather your thoughts on priorities and the current proposed options. The committee will use this input to refine proposals while staying within financial constraints.
Pat, I don't
Value basket of
understand
that.
with the current survey that's going out, what we did in the past. With the comments that the public's saying, are we gonna survey us to death until you get the answer you want? I have not been able to put that together yet. How are we going to melt them together? So that folks, if they're saying they only wanna pay $400 a year in taxes, the new survey comes out and say they're willing to pay 5 or 6. You're gonna irritate a lot of people.
I think part of how we reconcile that, or at least how I'm thinking about it, is that this survey is a much broader scope and reach, and it's also a different time. I mean, I agree with you that if we have surveys with conflicting information, that's tough. We had good participation on the last survey because the referendum had failed and it was fresh in everyone's mind. But I'm hoping that given how broad of a scope that the comms committee is shooting for here, that this reaches parts of the community that survey didn't reach. That this is not a targeted survey in that same way that one was. This is mass blast to everybody who can get their hands on it. And so I think that's how I see the two surveys being reconciled with one another.
And towards that end, we did press play with our printer. And so those postcards should hit everyone's mailboxes by the end of the week. Hopefully the storm doesn't interrupt that.
A thing you should be aware of. today I received the letter from 2 weeks
I
ago.
know.
It's something we gotta watch.
Yeah.
I did think of that. And I got.
Again, just we can, if you want to come back to this during discussion, but I'm gonna keep us moving along.
Okay, next in here, we had site selection. I'm gonna skip over these and save them for the end.
Yeah, we should be at
We already,
enrollment.
yeah,
Yeah, thanks.
perfect. All right. So a lot of charts. A lot of data. Essentially what we did is we took the enrollment that Jenna had updated with Tom and others. And Diane and I forget who else was in that group, but essentially what it looked at was what is, if we took the high enrollment plus 5%, if we took the high enrollment plus 3%, if we took the high enrollment at 0% increase. And I should say those are 3% increase, 5% increase. And we looked at number, and this is essentially getting to number of classrooms we're looking for. And then if we looked at 5 years surrounding that highest peak, what does that equate to in numbers of classrooms? Because that's really what it means for us when we're designing and how we can save square footage. And so what you're going to see on all of these is the option is in the lower corner. So this is option A. This is looking at all of them side by side. We put all the data up there, but I just wanted to bring your attention to like where the classroom numbers are, and it's where those arrows are. So if it's an orange arrow, that is your max enrollment plus 5%. If it's blue, it's max enrollment plus 3%. If it's green, it's max enrollment plus 0%. And if it's the 5 year surrounding, it's the yellow arrow. Essentially, as we stated last time, all of our options to date and will continue to date to be that max enrollment plus 5% until we are instructed otherwise. But as you can see, there is some variation depending on the option and or the grade levels. So like right now in this K through 2, and I'm just going to use the A for an example, and there's the data for all of them after this. But option A, if we look at the K through 2s, we essentially need 45 classrooms of K through 2 for the max enrollment plus 5%. That works out nicely to be 15 classrooms per grade, divided by 3 schools. It's about 5 classrooms per school, depending on how the design works out. If we do max enrollment plus 3%, we go down to 43. So we're able to save 2 classrooms over that grade level. And essentially we call that a 14+1, because as you can see in the numbers, like we have 14.4, well, that really means we need a larger classroom, larger than 14, I should say. But you can see, and maybe you can't, but in that we need 14, really 15, 15, and then 13. Well, that essentially means we could do 14, 14, and then 13 at another school. We can kind of share those, borrow from other grade levels. So that's a 14+1. And then at the classroom at 0%, now we're at 42 classrooms. So that's 14 across all grade levels. And then if we do classrooms for the 5 year surrounding, that's where we see 39 classrooms. But if you jump down to Wentworth is kind of that middle one for this option 3 through 5, we have 43 at the 5%, 43 at the 3%, 42 at the 0%, and then we go to 39. And then at the middle school, for the max enrollment plus 5%, we have 42. We go to 3%, it's 42. We go to 0%, we're at 40. And then the 5 year surrounding is 33. So that is the data. We were asked to update it. It's all here. We have it for all of the options. I will say in looking at this, something I want to point out is the yellow number, that 5 year surrounding. Just be aware that essentially that is a lower enrollment number than you will have students in those schools. So you will not have enough classrooms for the number of students that are born and coming into the schools at that 5 year surrounding. So just, again, want to make sure that's clear. And you have B as on the next slide. I'll pause here just so people can kind of digest B for a minute. But pretty similar. You're seeing sometimes no change from one to another, sometimes a classroom or two. I'm gonna move on to C.
This also email. This also.
I can't move it. And then I'm gonna move on to, once Emily moves that so people can see at the bottom here. No good spot for it. All right, moving on to D. Hopefully folks can see that okay. And then moving on to G. And that is the enrollment update. Do you want me to move on to design update and scope reduction considerations?
Oh,
I think you're in discussion block, right?
Yeah, we're
Oh, do
going
we
to
have it out of
discussion.
order? Okay.
Yeah.
Discussion block it is.
So with that, we'll open it up for discussion. Anything from what you've seen so far today or last week that you wanna, we haven't had a chance to discuss? Clear?
just on, jumping back to the prefab discussion.
Yeah.
Um, does that limit your materials choices in some ways? My example would be like exterior. Can it be a brick exterior versus, or does it need to be a particular type of siding? I'm just,
We were told that it can, and this is what we're told, as we dig in further, maybe we'll find something different, but we were told that it can be designed to the specification that we typically have. We talked about our wall section with them
Okay.
and brick being part of that. And we were told that that's possible.
okay,
So as far as we know right now, it will be possible.
okay.
One of the things I found out, Larry, we decided to go with brick. They go with a thin brick.
I've
It
been
is
here.
about a half an inch thick. And it's done with water. Has to be sealed like a regular brick building.
Right. I mean, on-site, you could also use that same veneer, right? Yeah.
I have a question for Lisa on the classroom projections, looking at this data that you've provided.
Yeah.
Would it be a fair takeaway that the 5% contingency versus a 0% contingency, there's really not much of a variance between what's may cost us in classrooms across the options? In other words, I think the biggest variance was 3 additional classrooms, 0 versus 5%. Would it be fair to say that if we adopted this 5-year surrounding equation, essentially, that we really start to play with fire, because these numbers seem pretty out of whack when compared against 0, 3, 5%?
So essentially, I mean, yeah, you're reducing three classrooms. If you were to go from 5 to 3%, to your point, you are essentially designing for what you know is coming and no more. Because remember that we have loaded this to the highest number of student teacher ratio. We're at the high end when we do this, so we don't necessarily have that contingency in there if you were to go to the low or the mid. So you run a higher risk of not having enough space if there is any change upward in that enrollment. Yeah.
Sure.
Do you have any initial thoughts on if we went from 5 to 0 and you're losing 3 classes? What the actual cost savings of that is, or is it pretty negligible?
And we can do a quick. You have 3 classrooms. It depends
Jenna,
on
can you,
what.
hold on, Jenna, can you just project that
Oh,
way?
yes,
I
I'm
don't-
sorry.
I'm not sure.
I was
everybody got you.
asking if we were to stay with the high end, but do no contingency instead of 5% contingency, you're losing 3 classrooms. What is the actual cost savings of losing 3 classrooms, or is it negligible?
We're talking about 1.3 million.
Plus staffing for each of those. Consideration here, but that's a cost.
pennies equals dollars. What about the shared spaces? How, I know this, you modeled the classrooms, but just in a general sense, this amount of reduction, or even if you went to the, surrounding 5, how does that impact the size of, requirements around the cafeteria and some of the other common spaces?
Well, I mean, in simplicity, it would reduce them if we go with less, obviously. We'd have to run that calc because they're formula driven, each one of them. It's not gonna change. In some of these, it's not gonna change your gym. You're still gonna have a full-size gym. There's no impact there. In the cafeteria, we'd have, anywhere, we'd have another, what is that, 100, not even 10. Yeah. Well, it's another almost 100 students from the 5-year surrounding up to the 5%. We'd have to come back and do that, but you're not going to see a huge increase or decrease in either one of those. If anything, what we find is what you guys did at Wentworth, which is you actually upsize those spaces to, let's say, I'll just pick, high enrollment plus some percentage. And then if you find you need those classrooms later on, you add them. And that way your core space can accommodate it. And then you can add those classrooms later. It's much easier to add a classroom. It is really tough to expand a cafeteria by X number of square feet to accommodate more students in the lunchroom.
Thank you.
I've got a question that might be for Jenna to answer. Can you just correct me if I'm wrong, or just tell me that I'm wrong? Does the population peak and then go down again, or is there just a continual growth trajectory?
So the birth rates that are giving you this high were from 2021, 2022, both those years you had 207. And then 2023, you had 167. So it went down, but we don't know what's gonna happen next year. Could it go up to 200 again? Will it go down? Like, there's no way of knowing that. So that's why they're just using the max that we know is already born to project out how many classrooms we would need.
Yeah, and as we've talked, right, like, so, let's assume that we're successful at referendum in November, and then, Harriman starts really digging into those final specs, right, that we're going to then put out for bid. We'll have another year's worth of data by that time, because we'll have the end of 2024, and so, it's presumable that we could take a look at those figures to help us shift in that, in that final analysis. If we see that we have another year going down, for example.
And the reason I ask is for that, if that's the eventuality, then would it be such a shameful thing to do to provide that peak portals as they go through the schools? I know this whole thing is surrounded about potentially getting rid of those things, but like, is it such a bad thing to provide 2 portables while those kids go through the schools while we build other things that we're proposing here? It could be a pretty big savings, couldn't it, potentially?
So can you say a little bit more about that? I want to make sure I'm understanding you, because like, as we
Yeah.
look, like if we played out like the scenarios where we're renovating and building additions onto our existing footprints.
Right.
We're
Yeah,
kind of
so-
taking that space, right, to accommodate for everything we need on the footprint.
So I'm not proposing throwing out the baby with the bathwater, I
Yeah,
think
no,
we're doing
no,
it.
no,
Yeah,
I'm just trying to understand what you're saying.
let's just suppose that this scenario that I've just sort of kicked out here is that there is this sort of peak population, and the population will go down. Let's just suppose that it's not, that 207 is the peak, and then it goes back down to 170 or something like that. And we've passed something that is in that orange category, and we've overbuilt, like we've talked about. Would it be such a bad idea to, put in portables for those extra populations that are making their way through the system over those next 10 years? Because if that's the case, that's just a short-term issue in the grand scheme of things.
And are you talking about moving said portable from the elementary school?
Well, I mean,
January
I'm not getting into that specific, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
Because your bubble is not staying at Blue Point.
no, you're right, yeah,
So
exactly.
they're gonna move through our system, and
Yeah,
I think the other thing to kind of remember is that that bubble is gonna carry pressure in the gym, and pressure in the cafeteria, and pressure in the library, pressure in the, you know, all the different areas the school system uses.
well, not necessarily, because we just discussed we're gonna be building those anyway.
Yeah, I think Fred.
I'm just talking about classroom space.
Yeah, I think Fred is saying, would it be so bad? And now you tell me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Would it be so bad if we just built 3 less classrooms? And then as it turned out, we know we have these kids and we are gonna plan for portables at the elementary schools the year that the enrollment is high.
Yeah.
Because we knew going into it that we had built 3 less classrooms than that bubble needed.
Right.
And so that's, I think you're just putting it out there
Yeah.
for conversation. But
Yeah,
that
I
was
don't
what I
care.
interpreted
I don't
your.
care how those portables go from building to building, that's not, I'm not trying to get into that level.
I think it would be bad if, sorry, go ahead, Jenna.
I was just gonna say, if I think back to, I think the portables is such a personal opinion for a lot of people, but I think if I think back to the survey, it was more than 50% of people wanted to get rid of portables.
It was 53.
I'll say my personal opinion as someone who has a little one in one of those grades, I hate to have her in portables every single year going through school, but that's just a personal opinion. If I think back to the survey, I'm trying to think with that lens, it seems like that be something that the public might not be thrilled with either.
Go ahead.
I also think it's important to remember that, like, you know, Wentworth was built in 15.
14.
Thank you. Opened in 15 and it around 2014. Wentworth opened. And it is technically, you know, the enrollment is down right now. There isn't unused space. So I mean, we can juggle these, like, what about these 2 classrooms or 3 classrooms, but like mandates in education change. Spacing requirements may change, things like that, where I think we want to build for the future, not try and kind of pinch off points here and there where, okay, now we have to put up a portable, you know, and all of these things. I imagine that we're trying to build for the future, and, you know, Wentworth kind of did that. They have that footprint that you can build on. If the enrollment gets, you know, large, things are sized well. It's kind of built with the future in mind, and it feels like we're almost going backwards from that. Like, cut that here, cut that there, where it's important to be cost focused and centered, but I just want to be really mindful about where we're making those cuts. And we're not just setting up the town for another referendum to pass buying more portables or buying more, you know, additions on schools in 5 years, because we didn't future plan.
Todd, can you speak from a facilities director standpoint about moving portables and the process of getting them on a footprint?
Yeah, I can. If I could just say a couple of things to Fred's question. I think that the town has demonstrated for the last 24 or 5 years that once you build a portable, it really isn't temporary. They've become permanent. And that if you want to address your enrollment spikes wisely, I don't think portables, I think portables are the cheapest way to do it, but I don't think they're the best way to do it. And I think that if we're gonna build additions to the schools, in the way you're discussing and these diagrams show, I question whether you'll have any room on the site to extend, to put in 2 portables or 3 portables or whatever is needed for those spikes. So I think we're already compressed on those sites for footprints. And I think John would agree with me. And to answer your question, Diane, about the portability of them, they're really only easily portable if they're not on a foundation. And there's only 4 of our portables that are not on foundations. And those are the newest ones at 8 corners. that doesn't mean they're not movable, but it really means breaking them in half and detaching them from a foundation, which you then have to fill in or do some pretty significant site work to you know, get rid of. So there, it's not impossible. Nothing's impossible, but it's not free either.
My question is actually about Wentworth, back to sort of what Alyssa was saying. Can you explain how the, on option A and option B, it doesn't show any work being done to Wentworth, any renovation or any addition. How is the enrollment growth going to be accommodated at Wentworth?
It's not in those options right now, which is why we showed in the cost that in order to address that, it would need to be added.
I guess I'm wondering why it's not shown at all, even on the charts as, you know, just the schematics of where it says renovation addition. If we know something needs to be done, why is it not shown?
Yeah, so I mean, in some ways, we were following the options that were set out by the SBAC one. And so that did not consider any there. And so then we brought it up as, in order to address this, you need to add this, which is why we show it with, this is what it costs without, and then this is what it costs to add it.
It is also denoted on this chart.
Yeah.
For both A and B, right under no changes to Wentworth, it does say that in the school year 2031 and 32, Wentworth is projected to exceed its capacity.
I understand, and that's kind of what I'm getting back to, even what's being presented out to the community, it doesn't seem accurate to me. If we know, in fact, that there will need to be work done to Wentworth, we need to try to capture that cost, I think, somehow and present it. And if we're trying to compare the options, that has just never made sense to me, that if we know that it's not going to accommodate that enrollment growth, I don't know why we're not showing, even if we don't know exactly what it's going to entail, it's not even listed on those, you know, those bubble charts.
I think that's because Harriman was charged to take the 4 proposals from SBAC one.
I understand,
Right.
but we have new
I
information.
get your point.
I mean,
Absolutely.
But that needs to come from this committee to tell us
It's
to
not
say
Harriman's job
absolutely
to
include
decide to
this.
change those.
that's why I'm bringing it up, because it doesn't seem up to date to me.
So when you look at the numbers though, and the number of classrooms that are at Wentworth, and you do the math using what the average and the maximum class size is, I ran those numbers and I saw that, especially this is a bubble that's coming through. It's not permanent, that you can accommodate every single student but you will have maximum class size, and maybe 1 or 2 classes will have 1 additional person. So I know, you know, I've heard that we have 40 classrooms there and something like 26 special rooms. And that we are at capacity now. But in fact, the number of students at Wentworth is like 100 below what it was built for. Is that right? I mean, we are below.
So how many was originally?
I think part of the problem, and this is one of the things that we've continually brought up in this committee, is that we continue to plan for the needs of students, and then the mandates and the needs shift over time. So even though, you know, at the time that Wentworth was built 10 years ago, there are mandates that we now have that were not in place at that time. And so different programs that we have to be able to offer, different student needs that have presented. You know, that's the really tricky thing about education, is it's a constantly moving target. And most of the things that are moving are not within our control, but we have to be responsive to those.
I mean, I totally understand that, but I look also at what is this all gonna cost? And what's the real priority? And, you know, I've been thinking that dealing with the issues that we have at the neighborhood schools, the primary schools that's the number 1 priority. And if we can, you know, every school district in this state does not change their classroom size just because the state decided, well, 740 isn't going to cut it anymore. We need classrooms of 1,000 square feet. Yes, if you're building a new school, but you don't go renovate your schools. I mean, you do the best you can, and everybody is looking at the dollars, the taxpayers. And so if we are, I think we really need to be focused on, the primary schools and what's needed. And I question whether we really need to put an addition on Wentworth. Given what we know now about the kids that will be coming through.
I think there's two things here. One, I kind of keep hearing there's an enrollment bubble, but we don't know that it's coming back down. We had 1 year data that's lower. But we need to see time and we need to see numbers coming out. But it's also important, I know, in saying, we're at max enrollment, we're just +1, but that just +1 is a child's education. And it's a teacher's satisfaction in their schools. It's the amount, it's more than just one. And so I think I really appreciate everyone being really cognizant of how we're portraying some of the things we're just saying. Because we do have parents in this community whose kids are in that class. And yes, I'm one of them. And I would hope that the people who are on this committee making plans for those children's educations aren't seeing it as just 1 year or just one thing, and are understanding that it's a child's education on the back end of this. So I want to respect the taxpayers and the financial constraints that we have, but I think we all need to be a little bit more cognizant of the language that we're using to describe some of these situations as well.
Yes.
Yeah, my question is, how many students are usually in a classroom?
Varies by grade level.
So we have ranges that have been set by the school board. So at the primary level, that's 16 to 20 students. At Wentworth, that would be 18 to 22. And beginning in 6th grade, it is 20 to 24.
And you have inclusion as well?
Yes, yep. And we also have self-contained classrooms and pull-out programs. So not 100% inclusion. It's all based on individual student need and their IEPs.
Everybody knows what we're talking about when they say inclusion.
I don't know.
So inclusion speaks to a student who has received services under special education, whether that happens in the regular classroom and somebody pushes in for support, or whether that is pull-out support and specialized instruction that occurs outside of the classroom.
I'm gonna agree with Sue to some degree on this, is that everybody's got different pain points in this process. Whether it's the cost, the neighborhood versus consolidated. And I do think there's compromise that's gonna have to be built into this at every level. And if one of those compromises is a larger class size for a 2-year bubble, which I'm not saying that's all in stone by any means, it should just be one of the things we consider, that might be a compromise that has to happen as a way to not build 3 classrooms, or to, for whatever reason, build smaller buildings or whatever, that we don't necessarily have to be able to accommodate every single one of the enrollment spikes.
That being said, what we can't do is change our enrollment numbers every month. Because they've got to design to the decision that we make. And this is the 3rd time we're looking at it, and because it's so important, I want to give it it's just due. But we can't keep coming back to this and changing it. So just be aware, we're kind of have to slap the table on this and let these guys go to work designing around the numbers we decide on.
Yeah, don't get me wrong, I wasn't suggesting that we
Yeah.
revisit.
Charlie, just procedurally, to be clear, there's no decision has to be made It's whether or not you want to change.
There's no motion on the table today to change anything. We just, Sue brought it up, I think, 2 meetings ago. We decided, let's investigate that. It's worth looking at. That's where we're at, so.
Yeah, to your point, though, I don't think it's productive to continually have this discussion. I think you need to be done with it, move on.
Well, we'll keep asking the questions as long as they keep getting presented to us, though. I mean, I mean, to me, it looks like there's options up there, so I'm gonna ask, but, here's the thing, though, is that the cost numbers that were presented to us a couple weeks ago were far higher than this committee agreed that we were gonna present to the public. So we've got to start asking questions about how to reduce the costs. We have to, and we haven't really had that conversation yet, so we've got some hard conversations to have in this group. And that's the only reason why I asked the question anyway, was just to start prodding at how we're gonna begin doing that.
Yeah.
The only purpose of that question.
Yeah, and that's really the next kind of agenda item, and I think that's what the focus of the committee will be over the course of the next 3 to 4 weeks, is finding those opportunities for scope reductions. This could be one. It looks like it's not gonna have the, you know, there's ways, I mean, if we decide to change the numbers, it could reduce cost a little bit, it looks like, but so this is one of the things we can look at, but we can't keep looking at it. So again, it's in front of us now, and I'll just say, I will go ahead, and I think it's, even though it's minimal, I think reducing, I'll make a motion to reduce the contingency from 5% to 3%. I think it's a minimal move, but at least it cuts some cost out.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor? Ava, you're up 6. Opposed? I see one hand. 2, 3.
Tom Eschner also raised his hand for the first one.
Tom, thank you.
Sorry, Tom.
Can we let's make sure we got his vote count right.
I don't see Tom. He gets promoted probably.
You're unmuted.
Okay.
I voted for the 3%.
Thanks, Tom. That starts 13 to 3, and that leaves 4 abstains. Motion passes. So we'll use the plus 3% contingency going forward.
Okay, so we'll change.
By the way, I don't have Leroy, Paul, or Carrie.
Yeah, none of them are here.
Okay. So those are part of the 4 abstention. Anybody else abstain?
That's they're absent. They didn't abstain.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's absent, right? Yeah.
Absent, not
Yeah.
abstention. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, point of order then. Shouldn't that mean the alternates are elevated to voting members for the purposes of this meeting?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I'm gonna defer to a better parliamentarian.
Would alternates vote in that?
If we're absent 3, can the alternates vote?
Well, that's,
I don't think it's
I
per
think that
meeting,
was
right?
per quorum, right? It doesn't matter.
I don't think it's
I-
going to change the.
Right, I knew it was coming to me.
Right.
No,
But
that's not-
that's the question.
It was my understanding that the alternates were gonna vote if we didn't have quorum and we needed alternate voters to vote. It wasn't that they could vote every time people were absent, but that's just my interpretation.
Yeah, that was my interpretation as well. April, I don't, that could be an amendment if that was.
My concern would be that anytime one person was absent, one of our 2 alternates could vote, and procedurally, I have no idea which one of you gets to vote.
They're ready if we need.
So just to be clear, the direction to us is to change the designs to enrollment, max enrollment plus 3%. We'll keep that going forward.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
I don't know, maybe we should make a rule before it gets. Like a procedural agreement.
Yeah, so we'll take just a moment. So James pulled up the charge. It's really unclear. It just says alternate members are expected to attend meetings. All are privy to all information, but shall not vote except in the event of absence or vacancy.
Oh, okay.
So.
What's the, say it again.
Since you're vacancy.
Alternate members are expected to attend meetings, are privy to all information, but shall not vote except in the event of absence or vacancy. So I think in this case where there are absent committee members.
Should we adopt some type of procedural thing? Because there's actually two alternates, then you have to figure out if one's
Which one-
alternate,
which
like
one
who's the
votes?
senior alternate, like, yeah.
In,
Flip a coin.
in my opinion, I think maybe the spirit of the charge was if we don't have quorum, they fill in. I don't care if they vote or not personally, but it does get complicated.
So, like, should we make a motion to count the alternates if there isn't, only if there isn't a quorum?
Gets to vote.
Yeah, we should do that at the beginning.
Yeah, yeah, you can make that motion.
Okay, let's think about it, but maybe we'll do that next meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I can look into it too. I don't,
Okay.
I think procedurally it's up to the
Doesn't
committee.
matter
Yeah.
once you start eliminating off.
Yeah.
it-
Yeah, I think we should just
Imagine
make it
before the
clear.
end of the committee, it'll matter.
Sure.
Okay. Okay,
So, sorry, the vote was 14 to
14, 13-3.
13-3.
Yeah. It's my 13.
13-3,
It was
and
13
then
or 14.
how many were abstentions versus absent?
I don't know.
I think it was 3. absent.
Will the, if you abstained from voting, will you just raise your hand so we can count you quickly?
The two alternates, are the only ones that didn't, right?
I don't,
think we count as
Yeah,
abstentions.
No, but I don't-
Fair enough.
did Elizabeth vote?
I think Elizabeth
Okay.
voted tentatively and then maybe took her hand down.
I had very mixed feelings, but I voted for the 3%.
You did.
I guess, and I don't think she got. counted.
I was not
Okay.
advocating.
I didn't count you. I thought you abstained. All right,
So
so
let's call it 14-3 with 3 absent.
we're 14 now. Okay, thank you. Okay, that will bring us to design updates and scope reduction considerations. Thank you.
Yep.
We're almost on.
On schedule, sweet, all right. So, before I start this segment, I will say that, as you can imagine, as we make all these different decisions of enrollment changes and things like that, we're constantly going back and updating plans and looking at them and making refinements. So we will continually refine plans throughout this process. When we show you a plan, it's a snapshot in time as the information we had at that time. What I'm going to show you now are, as we've had time to go back and look at these, we found cost savings. We found, oh, the enrollment was this when we made this plan, and then it got changed to this, and therefore we have a reduction in classrooms and things like that. So I'm going to walk you through what that is on various options. And then I'm going to show you a chart for each one that talks about cost reductions. And anything that we said we've reduced the planned square footage. We're just showing that as a straight out cost savings, and we'll show you where that's put in. But that's just generally how this process unfolds. You don't put it down on paper and it's 100% right as data is changing left and right. It's going to be fluid. So you'll see that we also put draft across a bunch of things too, because it is always a draft until it is approved by the voters. So that being said, we're going to start with going through options. We're going to start at option A. These floor plans are different than, there's similar to the floor plans that you saw in the appendix at the last meeting, but I wanted to explain what was different. All of these changes were captured in the cost estimate. But as we are going through the plans and talking about which classrooms should be in the existing building and not right-sized versus right-sized, it became very clear that kindergarten needs to be one of those that is right-sized, because it becomes a trigger for needing to add additional classrooms if it's not right-sized and it's in the existing building. And what that equates to is additional staff. So long story short, A and B in the existing primaries, you'll see these refined plans show first grade is in the existing building, and that is in a classroom the size it is today. So it's reusing the existing classrooms. So the changes here are a change due to moving kindergarten to the addition. So it's right size, but keeping first grade in the building in those classrooms. And we clarified with the district that all the K2 solutions in the existing building should be warming kitchens and not cooking kitchens. So that was captured in the estimate, but we've just made the updates on this plan. So now this plan matches what is in the number of classrooms and everything match what's in the estimate. So that was for Blue Point. This is for Eight Corners. Similar, essentially all kindergarten classrooms are now in the addition. And first grade remains in the existing building. Note that they have a smaller, it's hard to see on this plan, but the square footage of those classrooms is somewhere around the 630 to 650 square feet instead of the 800. It also has a warming kitchen. As we got to Eight Corners, we did realize, oops, did I not put it on this one? My apologies. It should say on both of these. There was too many classrooms. We were over counting classrooms based on the way we were figuring the enrollment. And we realized we had a square foot savings of 2,600 square feet. That was after the estimate. So you're going to see that in the table we provide you as a cost savings for option A. It also happened at Pleasant Hill. There were additional classrooms in Pleasant Hill that when we go back and we look at the enrollment, as remember, we were kind of moving the enrollment figures around a little bit. As we went back and looked at it, we recognized there's about 2,000 square feet in savings at Pleasant Hill in option A. So it's altogether 4,600 square feet across that option. So you're going to see that in the table. I'm going to go through all the options first, and then I'll take you through the tables. In option B, similar to option A, we had moved the kindergarten classrooms out to the addition, and we changed it to a warming kitchen. And this is for Blue Point. Option B, Eight Corners, we moved the kindergarten classrooms out and we changed it to a warming kitchen. And in Pleasant Hill, we moved the kindergarten classrooms out to the addition and we changed it to a warming kitchen. And the same in the new build. Not an addition, but essentially all the kindergartens are right size and it's a warming kitchen. So no real savings that we saw in B that we recognized in A in that regards. Moving to C, essentially what was not captured in the estimate was that kind of taking the same approach that we did on A and B, keeping a grade level in the existing building and not right sizing those. So we took the similar approach of the first grade in option C staying in the plan and the kindergarten being out in the addition. This ended up changing some of the major square footage to minor. So I think we don't have to move walls around where those classrooms are. So we essentially changed 5,800 square feet from major renovation to minor renovation. To remind folks of what that difference is, the major is we're moving walls and therefore it's pretty much impacting everything in that space. The minor is really the finishes. So it's floor, ceiling, paint, and things like that. At Eight Corners, we had in option C provided a full, bathroom gut reno. We did not carry that in A and B, so we removed it here in C. So we were comparing apples to apples. And we were able to switch about 1,240 square feet from major to minor by doing the same thing of looking at, even though we couldn't keep classrooms in this building, we were able to look at how we laid out those special education spaces and just reuse some of those existing spaces for those programs with having more of a minor renovation. At Pleasant Hill, we kind of took what we learned from A and B. So if you think back to all three of the options where we're renovating and adding on to the schools, if you notice, we took a little bit different approach in each one, and that was intentional so we could see what was the most efficient. And we were realizing that in A, one of the efficiencies we realized was actually putting the admin in the addition. versus renovating existing space for the admin. And so we took that same approach on C, and what we were able to do is put classrooms into the existing building. So at the lower portion of the floor plan, those are the first grade classrooms. Not, major renovation, more of a minor renovation. And then what we did is in the addition, which is everything from like that green area, which is the gym, kind of above that is the addition. We put the admin over there and some of the special ed, and then we have a 1-story classroom addition for the kindergarten. What this did is it actually allowed us to change some of the 3,000 square feet of the major renovation to minor, and actually saved us 2,000 square feet in the addition. In the new schools, where we have like a new 2-3, we have a new K-3, we're able to find some efficiencies there as well. In the 2-3, as we went back through the programming, we realized there were some spaces that weren't necessarily needed. As we refined the special education program and other things like that, there was some duplicate spaces that could be removed. And what it resulted in is the 2nd-story connector was no longer needed. So if you look, let me see if I can find my little pointer here. If you look right here on the 1st floor, there's a connector. In the reductions, we found that we no longer needed that connector for that program. We could construct that so that can accommodate a 2nd floor later. That could be your future expansion space, but it was able to reduce the square footage in the 2-3 new school by 5,000 square feet. In the K-3 consolidation plan or community school, in the estimate, when we had provided the estimator 160 square feet per student, that was the figure we gave, and it was about 198,000 square feet. The team since then had been able to refine the floor plan and really work out the layout and the efficiency around that. We're able to reduce the square footage by quite a bit. So they were able to bring it from 198,000 to 172,000. So this is a 26,000 square foot savings in the footprint of in the square footage of the overall building. So again, that level of refinement we're talking about. Same thing we saw in the new 1-3 community school. We had provided the cost estimator 160 square feet per student. And that essentially took us to 146,000 square feet. As we laid out the building and we looked for different efficiencies in the layout, we were able to bring that down to about 126,000 square feet. And that's about a 19,000 square foot savings. And again, these things are going to ebb and flow as we go, but as we get more information and really dial that in. And now as we look at the new information given on enrollment for that 3%, the next iteration will be what further reductions are there in any of the core spaces or classroom spaces based on that. So all that said, we then have a table just like this. I'm moving that participation because it kind of cuts off the bottom. We have a table like this for each of the options. And so at the top, it shows you what we had before not highlighted. So it was 108 million plus or minus for the scope identified. And to the earlier point, that was without the Wentworth scope. And then to be able to compare apples to apples, we said, add the Wentworth scope into that to solve for that grade level, for that grade or that enrollment in those grades. And that added 11 million plus or minus. Again, these are rough order of magnitude costs. And that got us to 119 million. In the table below where it says possible scope reduction considerations, the first one about adding Wentworth, that 11 million, we've already kind of showed you the math, what that does to the number up above. I'm going to jump down to the bottom where there's that yellow highlight. And essentially this one right here, this is that square footage we said we saw on the plan we could reduce some classrooms. That equates to about $3 million worth of scope. So I just went ahead and did the math up here because it then takes this number down and then it would take this number down. So really right now we're at 105 plus or minus without Wentworth, 116 with it. So the other areas to look at are that we noted previously were around the middle school. some of the things there, if you were to really focus on the spaces that are needed just for the sixth grade and not do some of the replacement of materials within the existing building. This number right here, about 4.8 million, is replacement of flooring, replacement of ceilings, paint. If you place the ceilings, it triggers lights, things like that in the existing classrooms that really aren't receiving work if we're adding space for the sixth grade. So it wouldn't necessarily have to happen as part of this, but if you're in there and you chose, you could do it. If you take that out, it's a savings of $4.8 million plus or minus. And I just kind of gave you a little summary down here of what that would mean if you added that, if you took that out from the number above. So if using this 116, so changes to the total is 111.2 million plus or minus. The next thing our team is looking at, and it's still under investigation, is what if you just prioritize those sixth grade spaces? And it was just, let's get those sixth grade spaces in. We're not doing anything else in any of the other areas. Is there an option that exists in that way? And that's something we're looking at. We then will have to meet with Diane and her staff to see how that works and then what potential savings those are. So that would be kind of the next layer on this one. We did put in here, SBAC 1, this option had a second gem. I know the programming has yielded that they don't need it, but we did throw it in here so you have that data point. If we were to add 7,000 square feet, and we can go back and forth on what size the gym is and all of this, but 7,000 is the same size that gym is right now. That would add approximately $4 million to this option. All right, so that's A. B, you see the same, it's laid out the same way. You have the totals we presented previously at the top, and then with the Wentworth scope and then the total. This Wentworth is included here. If you were to remove the material updates at the middle school, we would reduce that by 4.8. So this 132 would be 127.2. And then our next layer of information we're digging into is there further prioritization for the sixth grade scope that needs to happen at that school for the middle school, and what does that mean? And then at C, again, I'll set up the same way up here. The Wentworth change is included in the base number. But this savings down below for the layout efficiencies found in the plan, and we did note we have done the plumbing count for all of these. We do need to add 500 square feet to Blue Point to be able to have enough bathrooms for the assembly spaces. So we add 500K, we remove 7 million. The net is essentially reducing this to 155.5 in both of these columns. So then if you were to defer the work, let's say this one, remember this one moves sixth grade into Wentworth. And if you were to defer the work at the middle school for 7, 8, but keep the removal of the portables and the site work associated with that, we could potentially remove 16.9 million, which would reduce this total to 138.6. Just giving data points, if you remove the work at Wentworth that has been identified for the needed, for the 4 to 6, for the enrollment that is coming. If you were to remove that, you would be removing 10.4 million. And so that would bring that down to 128.2. But you would not have locations for those students. And then originally, just to remind everyone, the original SBAC option included keeping the portables at the primary schools. We have looked at that. Essentially, I don't have it in here. It's in the appendix. You'll see it in the appendix. We pretty much laid out what would happen if we kept the portables, that essentially the kindergarten will be undersized, which increases the number of kindergarten spaces we need. And it walks you through each one of those. I think we, off the top of my head, I think we're adding 4 kindergarten classrooms overall between the 3 there. But then we also are missing program space within that building, assuming we did no addition. So it's just kind of laying out what the impacts of that are. So we would need somebody to tell us if we were to explore keeping those portables in that location and what that was to look like. So that's a TBD. On D, essentially, we looked at the efficiencies in the plan that we talked about. Instead of just using the square foot per student, really dialing in the plan, we were able to reduce by 14.6 plus or minus million. That brings this from 156 to 141.4. If you were to defer the work in the middle school, remember, sixth grade goes into Wentworth in this option. You would remove, and this still includes removing the portables and doing the site work. You would remove 16.9 million, so this would bring this option down to 124.5. And if it was decided not to do anything at Wentworth, you would remove another 10.4 to bring this down to 114.1 plus or minus. And then G. Again, laid out the same way. So you have the 159 that we had up here before. Looking at the efficiencies in the plan, we were able to find 10.8, and then, you know, subtract from that 500K for the assembly spaces for the toilet rooms. That 10.3 million reduced from the 159, we got 148.7 plus or minus million for this option. Ways to reduce this could be to defer that 7-8 work like we've done in the other options. Again, that's that 16.9, brings it down to 131.8. If you wanted to then not move forward with the Wentworth work, you could bring it down to 121.4 plus or minus million. We are continuing to look at these plans. This is a first brushstroke of going through all of this. We're going to go through it again now with the new enrollment and see what impact that has. But essentially, this is a good snapshot of the items that we're seeing are those big ticket efficiencies that we picked up on right away, but as well as some of the big ticket scope items that you want to have in conversation about making big cost changes in these options. And so that's where we are right now on scope reduction considerations. And I had discussion block out of order.
That's okay. So just a point of clarification, as we look at the slides, the layout efficiencies really don't need discussion. That's just a design efficiency that we're going to see that savings.
Mhm.
So the things that we can consider are the things you presented that aren't highlighted.
Mhm.
Those are options for us,
Mhm.
but everything else is, okay, thank you.
Correct.
I just had one question, probably radical, and you can tell me I'm a terrible person, but on the new builds,
Yeah.
would we ever entertain removing the interior courtyards and absorbing that space with classroom? I know it'll affect like your circulation and like daylight it from above, because when I look at that, there's a ton of exterior wall on that, and that's a huge chunk of money right there.
We actually find that the courtyard is one of the more efficient plants. If you think about, I mean, if you were to fill that all with classroom, no daylight in any of those spaces in there. If you were to do, there's a couple organization structures. We have, you know, all the core spaces, and then we have, you know, classroom wings that kind of come off. You're gonna have just as much exterior wall, if not more, in that plan, because we have to cap the end of all of those too. And so here, the cap of the end is the share of the side of that next classroom. So like you would have essentially this wing coming out, and all of this would be exterior wall. Does that make sense? I can walk you through, it, but
We don't have to do it right now.
yeah, so essentially we find the courtyard is one of the more efficient layouts. And it also, just from an internal user standpoint and efficiency within the building as well. You don't, you know, custodial staff isn't going down one end, back the other, students are going down one end, back the other, all of that. But we also have looked at different layouts of buildings, and typically, not all cases, find the courtyard to be more efficient.
I know there's a lot of questions, but just to follow up on that, Lisa, how much does the site impact whether or not you can do a courtyard, or you need to do an elongated building?
It varies depending on what the constraints of the site are.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but in general, you think this type of layout will work on most sites?
Again, it depends on what it is. I mean, if we have something like if we were to hit ledge in that lower right corner, we're gonna modify the plan. But again, between the two, there's not a huge difference, but this is again, just more efficient. The efficiencies that we're talking about have less to do with, I would say, the organization pattern than it does. We found that we actually, if we had, in some cases, a space that was just too big. And so we went back and reduced it. Or we found that the way that things were spread out, if we brought them together, it was a greater efficiency, those types of things. Less, if you look at the previous plan, it's a pretty similar layout, and it's more of the size of different spaces that we found efficiencies in.
Thank you.
Yeah, two questions. When you present this information on the costs, when there's a new building that's part of the option, can you provide the information for just the new build alone, what the cost of that is? So that it's easier to see what's the cost of the renovation / addition?
Absolutely.
And then
the cost estimate has that too. I think everyone got a copy of that.
Okay. On option G.
Yeah.
So it's hard to know how much renovation is going on because in the neighborhood schools, all that's left is kindergarten. And so how much renovation is planned for?
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at the square footage as to what that is.
And so the total cost of option G, if you knew the cost of the new build, it kind of immediately tells you how much renovation is going on.
Yep, so we can present that information. Yep, that makes sense. And what we'll probably do is, if we just break out the new build, it'll be easier. Yep, indicate new build costs.
My question is, in one of you're saying materials replacement, what are you talking about? What kind of material?
Yeah, so I think you're referring to, let me go back to that. If we say, let's see, where is it? There it is. So like on B, remove minor renovation material replacement. So what that minor renovation is accounting for is replacement of carpet, repainting walls, replacement of ceilings, those types of things. And it shows in the diagram that it's pretty much doing that for all the existing classrooms in the building. And not necessarily is that needed to satisfy the programming that we need to accommodate? It is something that eventually we've identified does need to be replaced in time because it will age out if it hasn't already.
Can you speak to efficiencies on that? Is it, buy once, cry once kind of thing? I mean, do we gain anything by doing that kind of stuff while the contractors are on site, while construction's happening, rather than put it into a capital improvement plan?
It varies. And I know that Todd's gonna have an opinion on this, so I'll ask him on this too. It varies because it depends on how you guys essentially fund your CIP. If it's bonded or not, if it's part of the project, or part of I guess it is bonded if it goes out to the taxpayers. But essentially, sometimes what we find is when a contractor is in there already doing work, there is some level of efficiency of having them do that. We also have found that some disciplines, if under that $250,000 threshold, can get it done less expensive.
It's about stuff for me, moving stuff to get stuff done. So to do it in little chunks and pieces in the summer, for example, which is when you do a significant renovation, it would involve just moving and storing it somewhere else, which presumably you could do during the renovation when you have the whole place torn apart. So it just might mean a little additional cost if you did it onesie-twosie, if you will. But I know that for a fact, but it's really disruptive to do flooring, for example, and painting, you can move everything to the middle and go around it, but to take up flooring and you literally have to move everything out and then move it back in. And so that's just an extra step, but you have to do that under a renovation.
So you could do that in the summer as a project, or you could do it during the summer of the renovation, because we're not gonna do it during the school year.
Yeah, so if you're renovating, you have presumably a longer window of time within which to work. Whereas in the
But-
summer, you've got, everyone says it's 3 months. It's not 3 months, it's 7 weeks.
I,
It may seem like June, July, and August to you, but it really isn't.
I would just say that we're not moving the students out though.
No,
So those
right.
students are gonna be in there. So you really only have the summer in either case.
Yep.
Yeah.
The problem I have with putting it in CIP, you're competing about other projects in the budget. Then if you have budget restraints, it may not get done.
Mhm.
If there's need to have it done, I'd rather see it done while we're disturbing the school.
Are these things being contemplated because the floors at the middle school need to be replaced? Like, is that information that the school department has given you guys about the condition of some of these things that we're now maybe
I'll
calling
turn it over to Todd.
contingencies?
in regards to the middle school.
Just like everything, April, we categorize in different categories, so for roofing, we have a set schedule for when stuff needs to be replaced based on its age and condition, so similar thing would be for flooring. We have certain areas of flooring in the middle school, which we've already started and replaced. There's some more on the schedule moving ahead. The elementary schools, flooring is even older than that.
Mhm.
And the high school's creeping up behind that. So we try to stage it and just keep, to use Kate Bolton's word, piecing away at it.
Sure.
Yeah, so we haven't put on here the elementary, because there's enough of a renovation happening there that you're gonna be cutting up so many areas.
Gotcha.
The
Yep.
reason we've said this is because it's kind of isolated from where the additions would be happening, so it could be more easily separated. But all points are valid, and we put it on here because we need to find places to reduce costs.
Lisa, you just reminded me about some, a couple of weeks ago, you mentioned that in the primary school renovations, there's not an insulation renovation contemplated. Is that because what's there is adequate?
Mm-mm.
And that's obviously just because of the scope of, you'd have to open every wall.
We have to open every single wall. We either need to add onto the outside and re-sheathe the entire place and add exterior insulation, or add it to the inside and reduce your square footage.
Can you remind me, the new school, options, do they have, or site cost in this at all, or is it?
Yeah, we've made an assumption for site, I mean, there's the site cost for the estimator in regards to the work that goes there, but we've also, that earlier table we showed the assumptions. I think it was like, we just, again, picked a number for an assumption of 300,000 an acre. And based it on the number of acres that we were, saying needed for that site.
If I remember correctly, scope of work that was presented on the sixth, under plumbing or heating, you recommended geothermal. If it's geothermal and it's not insulated right,
I don't think we have geothermal on the primaries. I think the only place we put that was Wentworth, because it's an extension of that system. And that may have been an early thought, but at this point, that's not what is being considered at the primaries.
But that's somewhat where I was leading to, I guess, is you are contemplating updating the HVAC systems. But not the insulation, seems like a little bit of spitting in the wind.
The additions will be updated.
Right.
We can go back and provide a call. It's gonna be, it's going to add to it, and it's going to, either resheathe the building or reduce the square footage. And pretty much
I
then we need to
understand, yeah.
replace, if we do it inside, we have to take all the casework out.
Right.
Because we gotta do it behind the casework, put it all back, either put it back in or replace it.
Is there any way to estimate what the ongoing cost savings would be as, you know, is it a worthwhile investment?
What's the return on investment?
Yes.
Yeah, we can look into that.
I think you had something in the business case in the last report
Mhm.
about.
We
building
definitely talked about it,
efficiencies.
yeah.
All right, I'm gonna, we're gonna move on to, the site selection. I just want to remind everybody, this is, first off, thank you. This is what we asked for. let's, as members, take the time to go through this, and then there's some appendices also in the last set of slides and whatnot that are worthy to go through. By no means is this gonna get us to the price we need, so we gotta keep finding those, please. So please study the estimates, study the appendices that they provided on the last slide deck, and next, and then any other questions, comments on this stuff it's really what the next set of meetings is gonna be focused on, is how do we get these down to a price that we can stomach. With that, I will transition us over to the public session of our site selection updates. Tom, are you gonna, I know you told me before the meeting, did you?
Yeah, Tom Eschner is on, and I
Okay.
think, Tom, are you feeling well enough and able to walk us through the public portion?
We're gonna take you off mute here, just a sec, Tom.
Yeah, sure, he's not sure, you sure he's not sure?
No, I was waving to you to say, yes, I'm available. So we good to go? Okay, so in the next few minutes, I want to explain the process and present the status of the site evaluation subcommittee's initial review of the sites. I'll go through a little bit and then turn it over to Tom, and Frank is, I think, available to jump in with various graphics. So you see, well, at any rate, I'll just start with process. So the subcommittee was established back in December with the purpose of identifying the sites, as we've discussed. I want to emphasize that we understand the importance of site selection in the process, as the property acquisition is going to be a significant component in the overall cost, and it will serve as a community facility for many years to come, so we want to get it right. Throughout its work, the subcommittee also has maintained confidentiality in our deliberations, and as you're aware, only part of this will be public this evening. And that we will, however, be documenting our decisions throughout the process, and that information will become available later in the process. So in identifying of sites for our evaluation, we considered not only property listed on the market, but also town-owned property and other potentially suitable property, regardless of whether or not the owner knew we might be thinking about it. As previously discussed, a small school requires 8 to 10 acres. A larger school requires about 15 or more. So using the minimum size of 8 acres as our only selection criterion, the subcommittee identified 22 potential sites. And just for clarity, some of them consisted of 2 or more tax parcels, but we still group them as sites. And I want to stress that the numbering of the sites that you'll see does not imply any order of preference or significance. It's just the way that they were numbered. And as you also may recall, in early January of this year, the subcommittee asked members of the community for ideas regarding other sites that might be potential and should be considered, but that we had not been able to identify. So the subcommittee reviewed these 22 sites at a high level to identify constraints such as wetlands, access limitations that would preclude their use, and also things like the presence of utilities, topography, location relative to population centers, and other factors that might limit their usability or might weigh into their consideration for a given site relative to the building options. We also contacted property owners, and I say we, the town manager, contacted property owners to determine whether or not they were interested in having the non-town owned and non-marketed properties considered in this process. So through this process, we were able to reduce the number of sites warranting more detailed evaluation from the 22 that I mentioned down to 9. We developed a shorthand of red sites for those sites that we eliminated and green sites for those that were retained. And you'll see that, well, actually you do see that on the screen in front of you. Site 4 is surrounded with a green border, and 5 and 6 are surrounded by red borders. And I'll explain the reasons for each of those. So the next phase, of our subcommittee's work will be evaluating these 9 green sites in more detail in a comparative analysis using a set of criteria that largely provided by Harriman, but will be refined in consultation with the subcommittee to further reduce the number of sites for a more detailed evaluation. As mentioned, the specifics of the subcommittee's work are confidential, as not all landowners are aware that they're being considered, or the public disclosure might weaken our negotiating stance. So the basis for conclusions regarding the suitability of each site is being documented, and we will make it publicly available to the extent that the subcommittee's recommendations are required to be presented for public examination. So the remainder of the presentation, which will be brief, will be separated into two parts, a public portion and an executive session. The focus will be on these 9 green sites, that is the sites that are retained that came through the initial review, with one exception, which is the 3 municipally owned sites identified on the school campus and Memorial Park. So recognizing the focus that was placed on the property owned by the town on the school campus and the potential for the cost savings that it might provide. In other words, using town-owned property might provide. We felt it was important to walk through these sites so that you understood why they were retained or eliminated. Who were eliminated, as I'll explain. I'll start with those 3 sites, and then Tom will continue by going through the remaining green sites in the executive portion of the session. And I invite Tom or Frank to jump in if I'm misspeaking or they have additional information to add. So site 4, you see here in the south, that is Memorial Park. It's adjacent to the town hall, public safety building. School campus is to the north, and the middle school is to the northwest. Site 5 includes the ice rink, ball fields, and the tennis courts that you see in front of the public library, and the basketball courts that are there as well. And then site 6 is the middle school, consists of two parts, but they're both considered part of the site. So if we can go down to, let's do them in numerical order. So this is Memorial Park. This site we felt should be retained. It is small, although it's about 25 acres. It does have an existing pond, as you can see. It has some mapped wetlands, and it has a field that is, gets a lot of use for various purposes, as well as the pickleball courts. Has good access potentially from Sawyer Road, although there is concern about access to the public safety or for public safety to Sawyer Road. We could not impede that traffic, but I believe it's Durant Road to the northwest, and it would provide access to the campus, and then there could be a Sawyer Road access as you see. This layout is a conceptual layout just to see whether a small school could be fit here and still retain the shared use play field that you see there on the right. So this is not saying this is exactly what a school would look like. I want to be clear on that. But it does allow, or appears to allow, for bus access, drop-off, parking, while retaining the fields and while not impinging upon either the mapped wetlands or on the pond that is on site. We do understand that it would remove, the use of this site would remove some space from existing public recreational use, may create traffic concerns, adjacent neighborhood concerns, but we being the subcommittee did not feel it was really our purview to weigh these types of competing concerns. It can accommodate a small school. It is town owned, and therefore we felt it was appropriate to retain. And I don't know if we want to have questions at the end. Yeah, let's go to 5. So this is on the school campus, the ice rink there, Wentworth and Wentworth parking lot, and the adjacent football field and track you see there for reference. So this is half of the site. I'll talk about the other half in a minute. This consists of 2 areas, the ice rink and ball field area that we're talking about now, and the other is the high school tennis court area. So the rink is severely constrained by wetlands and is developed to a significant extent as well, with parking, with existing buildings, with the road trending from town hall to the parking. As the figure shows, the developable area is less than 5 acres, so it would not even accommodate a small school. Unless you say, well, maybe if we paired it with something else, it would work. You know, there's nothing contiguous that would adjoin it and would allow for a larger building to be constructed.
And just for reference, this is part of number 5. So there's 2 sites that we explored on what we showed as 5 on the previous slide.
Right. The other part, the next part will be to the right of this figure right here. So the library's on the top, just off the top of this figure. There's Wentworth on the left. This had looked much more promising when we just looked at the National Wetland Inventory wetlands mapping, which surprisingly indicated that what is now mapped wetland was not wet. But I mean, it certainly looks wet to the even to the untrained eye. And in fact, information that was available in the town files indicated that it is mapped as wetland. So that leaves a developable area of less than 2 acres. And so again, even if paired with the 4.3 acres over on the west, or over on the left of this figure, they're not contiguous, and without taking substantial existing uses out, it's not viable. So this was eliminated. We can proceed to 6. So this is the middle school. There, as I mentioned, 2 parcels. I'll deal with them separately. In the lower left is one part which is constrained by wetlands to the south and would encompass existing ball fields, but still only leaves 4.3 acres as developable area. To the north, you have a mapped vernal pool, and there is a buffer area in which tree clearing is not allowed, a 250-foot buffer essentially. That has kind of a funny shape, and it impinges on a lot of what would seem to be potentially developable area. And so what actually could be used is only about 2.6 acres. Frank may have more info on specifics, but my understanding is that DEP has told us that we have pretty well overextended our welcome on use of wetlands in this area on the municipal campus as we've done the various construction projects.
I was just gonna say, it's worth noting that to the extent that some of the options consider an addition to the middle school, this suggests that does not preclude the additions.
Right. Yep.
Typically are shown in that area of the 2.6 acres.
Yes, over on the right there, by the towards the parking area.
It does potentially have impact on play fields, but I don't know that there's wetland impacts that would not allow us to do the addition.
Correct. And that is the extent of the sites. That is the extent of our evaluation of the town sites that can be presented at this time for public presentation.
I do want to say that the addition is shown on top of that parking lot to the right. So
Yes.
that's.
Yep. So the rest of the session is protected and will be done in executive session. Logistically, I think we'll need to we're gonna ask the members of the public that are here, there's only one, to leave shortly. But for those that need to connect remotely, Tom and Frank, I think we'll have to shut this down and start up a new Zoom.
Yes.
And Diane will send you the invite.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. So while that happens and we clear the room, let's take a 5-minute bio break, and we'll clear the room and reset the Zoom and then reconvene.
Thank you.